Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We finished page 1299. Aleph Reis Sadik Tes. We're now begin page 1300. So just to sum up what we've learned, the last paragraph on 1299, Rabbi Rashab went to the second half of the verse. The first half has been explained at length, Havai Yechata Merivo, and even the second half of that, and then the next words, that was already being discussed. We're going back now, all the way back, page 1287. We're now on 1299. So we're talking about 12 pages ago. The second part of that verse was on top of 1289. He, Allah b'shemaim Yiraim. And now, he comes to the end of the verse, Vayitan Eiz Lamalke, Vayorim Keren Meshiche. He gives strength to Malchus. So he said that Malchus is referring to, as the Zohar says, to Kuchabrichu, the level of Zah. What is the strength that is being given? Is that Zah is being elevated to the level, it's being crowned with a level of Atzmus Ein Sof that's higher than the cosmic order, than the entire structure, all the way to Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, higher even than Havaya Sheba Atzmus, and that's the level of Helam Ha'or. And that's the meaning, Yitin Oiz is Gvura, Tagburas, intensity, strength, which comes from Helam Ha'or. The Gvura of the concealment is coming from a very powerful place, the Gvura to conceal. But here the Gvura is coming as a strength, is coming revealed in Malchus. So he's giving strength to Zah. And because it's coming from such a high level, it goes all the way into Zah. So that's why, like we learned earlier, that's the level of Moichin, the godless, all the way from Chachma, and the highest levels of Moichin are going into Zah, and it makes the midas sichlim, if you recall, that the subjective emotions become actually cognitive emotions, completely consumed, instead of self-interest, with God's interest, God-centric. What's the second statement? Vayorim Keren Meshiche. So Meshiche goes on Malchus. Like he says, Knesset Yisrael. And that the Hamshach in Malchus, not just in Zah, all the way Malchus, which is considered the lowest level, the level that becomes, he said before in the previous paragraph, the level of Kalim, the level of complete Helam, because Malchus is a complete state of concealment. Zah is a state of Gilui. But it's a Gilui where Chesed and Gvura can challenge each other, but it's Giluyim. And even that is being elevated to from the level of Helam. Now we're going from the Malchus is receiving all the way from the Helam Atzmi. Now he adds the word Atzmi. The Helam Atzmi, and that, let's just read it inside, the Ein Sof, and that Malchus, which on its own is fundamentally a concealed state, will be a Gili Mitzad Atzmi. In other words, its Gili won't come from a higher level, not as a recipient, like the moon receiving from the sun, but the very entity itself will radiate and reveal the divine source in the Helam Atzmi. That's Yorim Keren Meshiche. Keren is like Etzem. The Etzem, Yisreimim, Yorim Keren Meshiche, the Etzem of Meshiche, of Malchus, will be elevated. And that's that Malchus will radiate the Helam Atzmi. Keren. And that's also the word Keren from Meir Ve'er, like Keren Heid Pono, when you talk about Moshe Rabbeinu, it also means Gilui, but it's a Gilui of Etzem, not a Gilui of Gilui, as I explained yesterday. And that's far higher than Eris and Giluyim. Etzem Shalamayim Chinisam Shachal Gambe, not Chinisam Batzmus, it will be in a state of Gilui. And that's why in the future we say that Biti, Rani, V'simchi, Basi, and Biti will be even higher than Imi. Even though Aim is Bina, and it's higher than Zah, but Biti will rise to a place that's even higher than the mother. Like he says, L'mayim Chinis Imi, and he finally quotes it from the Zohar Vayetze, where he says that it'll be called not just mother, but called by the name, the Shmoya Atzmi, of the Helam Atzmi of Ein Sof. That's what we learned. Now, I'm not going to go over what I explained yesterday at the end of the class yesterday. I explained what is this meaning that something that's completely beyond revelation will be revealed. And we discussed it, that that's a dimension of the mystery and the mystique that is fundamentally something that's not expressible will be expressible, but you have to go through the Giluyim to get there. But I said I would explain one more thing. What's the difference between Helam and Helam Ha'atzmi? We learned before that we're talking about a concealment that's not a concealment relative to revelation. You know, concealment could be, it's concealed this moment, and then a moment later or a while later, you can reveal it. That's still the gather of Gili. If you recall, when we learned about this back when, let me just find it back where this was discussed. One moment. Okay. I don't remember the exact page I'm referring to, but I do want to refer to page 1276, where he first introduced the idea of Helam. And then he said there's Helam Ha'ir and also Helam Ha'atzmi. If you look on top of page 1276, and then, just a moment. Give me just another minute. I got to find this. Let's just find this inside. She'er Shakelim. Yeah. Yeah, top of page 1270 is what I was referring to. So let me just go over a few things here that I think will make it a lot more understandable, because here he clearly distinguished between Malke, the Yitin Ezla Malke that is going from the Helam into Zah, and Vayorim Kerem Mashiach is going from Helam Ha'atzmi into Malchus. What's the difference in Helam and Helam Ha'atzmi? I want to explain that. And I'm referring to the top of page 1270 where he first made that distinction. And he actually called Helam Ha'atzmi Shmoi HaKol Batzmusei. So even though we have the expression Shmoi, Hayahu Shmoi, but then the Shmoi Kol Batzmusei is higher than Hu. It's the level of Hu rather in the Helam Ha'atzmi, and he calls it also the Yechelis Klal. It's not a level of Batzmusei. Shen B'chinas Klal B'chinas Kiyim B'chinas Yechelis. So I want to explain what that means. So I think a good way to explain it, and it really continues what I discussed yesterday, is let's begin with our own Mipsari Echza Lekach. From my flesh I behold God. It's always best to understand these levels, not in abstract ways, but to find examples within our own faculties. So this is an example I've used a number of times. In general, when we say a person actualizes their potential, what does that mean exactly? So let's just use an example. Let's say I can take a stone and I can throw a stone for 100 feet. That's my natural strength. Maybe if I exert myself, I could throw 200 feet. I'm just throwing numbers out. It's not whatever number you like. What happens if I exercise and I condition myself so my muscles can expand and maybe I can end up throwing 500 feet? Just like you see people can run, they can run a mile, but with conditioning and exercise, they can end up running 20 miles, a marathon. So when you say actualizing potential, that means there's what we call koiches gluyim. These are the revealed faculties. Everybody has those revealed faculties. For example, 20/20 vision. That's a perfect eyesight. Children are born with 20/20 vision in most cases. But then through life, whether it's genetic, whether it's bad habits, whether it's however you want to explain it, people need to get corrective lenses, glasses. Because the eye, even though the eye potentially has the ability to see, but either the keli has been somewhat worn down, or whatever it is. The point is, faculties of the human being is what we express and what the potential that it has. The same is with the mind. When you work harder, you guide the mitzasi, you struggle, you gear, you exert yourself with your mind, the mind can deliver more, like it is with the other faculties. So in the language of Chassidus, koiches gluyim is what we see revealed. That's the most obvious. Then there's a thing called koiches nalamim. Koiches nalamim means it's concealed, but it's not really concealed fundamentally. It's just concealed, relatively speaking. Like what I said, when I exercise my muscles, I can now use my hand, I could throw farther. But the potential was there. I didn't create anything new. It was there, but it had to be drawn out, like any type of thing. Like any type of training that trains you, and then you can draw out even more strength from your faculties. The question is, how much potential do we have? Now, being human beings, we're limited. At some point, you're going to come to your limit. You know, maybe some people could end up throwing a rock for 1,000 feet if they have that strength. And some people will never be able to reach that level. So you see, there's the actual, there's the potential, which is like the concealed. There's the concealed that you can develop, and that should too also become revealed. So when you said, for example, you sit down to write, so one of the examples Chassidus gives, you write Aleph, Beis, Gimel, you're writing letters. But you have the potential to write a lot more than just 3 letters. You can write thousands of letters. You can write books. But in actuality, your hand, when you're writing, you're only writing what you're limited to write, whatever you decide to limit your writing. But if someone will say, can this person write more than 3 letters? Obviously we can. Now, of course, we can get tired and so on. My point is that what we see actual revealed and what is concealed are not commensurate with it. They're not on the same level. Potential is always greater than actual, obviously. The concealed always contains more than the revealed. Okay, so we went through concealed and revealed, but this is a concealment that's only relative. Like when we say, for example, after 40 years, that a student, after 40 years, comes to understand, and she comes to fully perceive the inner intelligence of his teacher. Now, it was always there potentially. It just takes 40 years because of maturity, because of different understanding, whatever the explanation is. But this, again, is an example of something that's a helam, but it's not a helam be'etzem. It's a helam lefi erech hagili. So throughout Seder Shtalshalus, the same idea, when you climb the ladder as one gets closer to godliness, you start with what you have access to. Like we learned earlier, mutfa murgish muskel. For a child, God blesses you with health. God blesses you with food. God blesses you with other gifts. So you say, Moida ani lefanecha, you say, Birchas HaShachar, you thank God for all the things that He does for you. This is on our terms. But obviously, God has more than that in his storehouse. And as we grow, we come to discover deeper dimensions. I'm just using the moshel and the nimshel here. But still, it's just a matter of time or a matter of work. In other words, as you climb from Malchus to Zah, to Bina, to Chachma, and higher, it's just a matter of, it's not revealed. Before it was revealed. You may recall a while back, he spoke about this, that every level in Ishtalshlus is Beiskalalus in a higher level. Because everything works in that way. Helam Gili, Helam Gili. Today you know something. Tomorrow other things are concealed from you. As you grow, you learn new things. Just to refer to you the page where he spoke about that. Page 1284. Spoke about it relatively at length. But this is all what we call a Helam Shal Hagilui. It's called Helam Shal Hagilui on the bottom of 1282. That's what I was searching for. You don't call it Helam Be'etzem. But then we go deeper. Behind Koiches Nalamim, there's a thing called Koiches Hiyulim, or sometimes even higher koiches atzmim. Now, what does that mean? That means you're getting now into a level of the faculty that may very likely never be revealed at all. It's just there, the power to write, the power to throw a stone. In the nefesh, there's such a power. But what actually comes out in reality comes either the level of gilui or the level of the helam of the gilui. So now, in that helam itself, you can talk about something that is not shaykh to be gilui. Like someone will say, the power of your mind, the power of the koyach hamaskil, the power to conceive of ideas. Even though from there comes intelligence, but that part is superconscious. It will never be revealed to us. We only know seichel comes from there. So you can have a level of gili, you could have a level of helam, which means it's not revealed today, but tomorrow it could be revealed. Then you have a level called helam, that's beyond, altogether beyond gili. But it's not yet called helam ha'atzmi. It's called a helam that's not in the realm of gili. It's like the koyach hamaskil, but it's still koyach hamaskil. It's not koyach hamischasid. It's the power to conceive. It's not the power to do kindness. So when you go to the higher level, as you go backwards, there's a level called the very faculty, let's say, of conceiving ideas. That's considered a helam, that's not shaykh to gili. But then there's a thing called helam ha'atzmi. Helam ha'atzmi is how it's all within the nefesh itself. So now, till now, we've been talking about faculties, revealed faculties, concealed faculties, core faculties. Then there's the koiches haklulim b'nefesh. Now we're talking about the nefesh has within it the capacity to do things. Like we said before, the word yochelis, it's capacity. Now we're talking from the point of view of the nefesh. These three are all levels that are in the world of faculties. Now, as we have learned and discussed many times, the Eibishter wanted to make it in a way that there's gradation so we can grow. If there's ever a leap, the interface won't be complete. So we need constantly to know there's revealed, there's potential concealed, there's atzmi, but it's still a helam. You can't call it helam ha'atzmi. Then there's the helam ha'atzmi, the power of the concealment within the divine source. He has the power to conceal, just like he has the power to reveal. How is it reflected in the koiches hanefesh? We too, we have the revealed faculties, the concealed faculties, the level of the faculty that's just a concealment beyond revelation altogether. It's just like the source of it all. You still call it, it's called well, he said also the expression, you can't call it the source of a source because it defies any form of revelation, but in some way it's there, it exists. There is a state of helam, and then there's helam ha'atzmi, how it's all encompassed within the nefesh itself of the human being. Now we're still not talking about the nefesh mamish. The nefesh is altogether beyond helam and beyond gilui and beyond all of this. But the helam ha'atzmi associates to the etzem, like we spoke about the artist. There's the artist as he reveals his art. You see a piece of art. You see the potential he can create other types of art. That's a helam. Then there's the very power to be an artist, the power to create art. That's a helam. That's not a helam atzmi, but a helam atzmi, but it's a helam that defies gilui. And then there's how the artist himself has that capacity. So helam atzmi is essentially, or you could say helam is an interface between the helam that relates to gilui and the helam atzmi, which relates to etzem. So if you really want to break it down, you'd say there's atzmus, there's the helam atzmi, there's also the atzmi that has the power to be megala. He doesn't call gili atzmi because helam atzmi, as I explained, reflects more of atzmi than gili, because gili is always some form of structure. Then you have the helam, then you have the helam of the gili, like let's say yudke and vavke. Yudke shma, yudke is a helam of a gili because it's a gili to yourself, but it's not revealed to another. But even behind that, there's a helam that's higher than that. Then there's the helam ha'atzmi, and then there's all the way the etzem itself. So that's some explanation a bit about understanding how this works here. And as you see, the highest is revealed in the lowest. In Malchus, touches the helam ha'atzmi. Zah gets from the helam. So in the concept of us interfacing with God and integrating our lives, all these levels are critical, because without one, you can't get to the other. It's like climbing a ladder. And you need all of them because each one expresses another dimension of the divine experience. So you may ask, what's the difference in Aveda between Helam and Helam Ha'atzmi? So I'll tell you. If you connect to the artist through his art, that's a connection on a Gili level. If you connect to the artist and knowing he can do other types of art, that's connecting already to the sphere of Saint Ketz, where God's infinite capacity to do all types of Gilui. If you connect to the Helam behind the Gilui, it's still really a Gili, but it's not really Begoli yet. So you're discovering more of something that is going to be discovered, but you haven't reached there yet. If you reach the level of Helam that's fundamentally higher than Gili, you're coming now to understand that there's a certain mystique to God, but it's not about God himself. It's about a power that is completely removed from existence. And when you come to the Helam Atzmi, it's an experience of God himself, how God reflects in his ability to completely to create this type of Helam. So Helam Atzmi creates the Helam. So really, it's about different dimensions in how a person relates, just like you have b'chol avavcha, b'chol nafshcha, b'chol meidecha. Or we speak about Kabbalah Shel mitzvahs, Kabbalah Shel Malchus Shamayim. Sometimes we relate to God through his mitzvahs. Sometimes we relate to God as how he relates to you. And then we save of Kalam, and then we reach the level that's higher than save of Mamala, as we learned earlier. So it's all about really where you stand. Each of us is in a different place. Some of us are still working on just having a relationship with God, period, even on the most basic level. And then, of course, there's these higher and higher levels. The Rebbe Rashab, in a comprehensive fashion, is giving us the whole picture from the lowest to the highest. And ultimately, Ein Oid, remember, comes after hundreds of pages of discussing Avayu Elikim, which is still revealing the Helam, in the Helam of Elikim, revealing the Gili of Avaya, but we're not talking about Ein Oid, where you reveal the very Etzem within Elikim, that the Keli itself, or the concealment itself, or the moon itself, or Malchus itself, is expressing the highest level of Helam Ha'atzmi. Now, the thing is that the darkest moments in history, like we talk about Gvuras, are all originate from those deepest levels beyond Helam and Helam Ha'atzmi, all the way to Helam Ha'atzmi, like I just explained. So in a way, you could, bottom line, to sum it up, Helam relates already to reality, even though it's fundamentally concealed. Helam Ha'atzmi relates more to Atzmus, so you're focusing more, like, so to speak, on the like I say, Bal HaRotzen, in opposed to the Rotzen. So there's the Eibishter, and there's the Eibishter as he manifests in a expression, even if it's a fundamentally concealed expression that's beyond any form of Gili. And of course, dealing with the Eibishter himself is always going to be the highest levels. But we can't deal with God if we don't understand how God relates to us in some manifestation, whether it's Gili or Helam of the Gili, or all the way up to the Helam, all the way to the Helam Ha'atzmi. So I hope that was helpful. If anybody has any questions, please. If not, we'll continue on next page 1300. Okay, so let's go to page 1300. Top. He's going to explain now in Avodah what we just learned, that Malchus, the Yorim Kerem Meshiche, that Meshiche, Malchus, is Reimamus, is lifted up all the way to the Helam Ha'atzmi, and though on its own it has no revelation, it expresses that deepest level of concealment, and that Etzem itself, which is like he called these words, Shalom Etzem, Shalamaylam B'chinas Amshach Legamri, that's only Helam Ba'atzmusei, Yeh B'chinas Er V'Gili. And that's the level of Biti that's higher than Imi. So he's going to explain now what that means in Aveda, which will help understand also the concept. So he says, the Hinen is barely ill. Because now it was explained earlier, and earlier is back to page 1250. We're now 1300, so we're talking about 50 pages back. Aleph Reish Nun. If I recall correctly, let me make sure. So he's going back 50 pages. Yeah, Aleph Reish Nun. Yeah. So what did we learn there? Yesterday I summed it up a bit. We learned that the Bas Hubchinas Eved, Biti, Bas, daughter, Malchus, is the level of Eved, the servant. But there we learned servant as a makabel, a recipient, that all you are is a servant. All you're doing is fulfilling God's commands. Whereas a sar, a minister, is like a chesi. He's more like a sibling. He's like a colleague. He's still a subject of the kings, but he's also involved in the whole process of writing laws and strategizing, as we learned back there. Imi was even higher. Imi is mashpia, the neshamas of mashpia in Torah. But biti, bas, is the level of makabel, eved, simple servant who's supposed to follow the orders. Kabbalah soil. But now he's going to go the other way around. In Giluyim, it's true, an eved is lower than a sar, than a minister, and definitely lower than the mashpia into zah. But be'etzem, the eved and the bas is actually rooted in a far higher level, and he's going to explain how we see that. We find also today, no, it's not just la'osid love. La'osid love, we know that will be revealed, but also today, also in our times, we find sheyesh yisra be'eved ma she'ein b'sar. We find a quality, a virtue, a superior quality in the servant that you don't find, that doesn't exist in a minister. Even though the minister is on a higher level, he's not just following orders. He's the one that works with the king. He's an assistant, what do you say there? He said they're advisor to the king. Yoyetzei hamelech. We find there's a quality. He's going to bring the Gemara. Ukid be Gemara brachas seif perek hey. So in brachas at the end of chapter 5, I think it's daf maybe Nun Beis. I don't remember exactly, but under chapter 5 it tells a story. So he's going to only quote part of the story. Let me tell the full story, and then we'll read it inside. So it talks there about Rabbi Chanina Ben Dosa, who was known for his prayers to be able to heal people who had illness. So once it says there that Rabbi Chanina Ben Zakkai, who was the Nasi Hador, he was a leader of that generation. As we're going to soon learn, he's compared to a sar, to a minister. His child became sick. So he asked Rabbi Chanina Ben Dosa to pray for him. He became sickly ill. He was very deathly ill. So Chanina Ben Dosa, the Gemara says, bent down, he put his head between his knees, and he davened to Hashem, and the child was healed. Says Rabbi Chanina Ben Zakkai, had I put my head down and prayed like you, it wouldn't have accomplished anything. I wouldn't have succeeded in healing my child. So they asked the question there, what does that mean? Rabbi Chanina Ben Zakkai was far superior. He was the leader of the time. Rabbi Chanina Ben Dosa was a great man. But comparably, so Rabbi Chanina Ben Zakkai said, I am like a sar, like a minister before the king, and he's like an eved. And the eved has more power than a sar, because the eved, like he says there, it goes in and out. A sar, so let's just read inside, but that's what it says there. And the Rebbe Rashab is using that as a proof of the quality of the mila of an eved, bas, over sar.
Rabbi Chanino.
What?
Chanino, not Chananyo.
Chanina Ben Dosa. I said Chananya? Okay, Chanina Ben Dosa. So the Gemara says like this. Rabbi Chanina Ben Zakkai says, Ilmoli hitiach, had I bent down, basically put my head between the knees and prayed, it wouldn't have accomplished. But Rabbi Chanina Ben Dosa, then, when Rabbi Chanina Ben Dosa did it, his prayers were answered. That's what the Gemara says. V'omer Rabbi Chanina Ben Zakkai, mepnei shehu kesar lefnei hamelech, because he, Rabbi Chanina Ben Zakkai, is like a sar before the king. He's a minister. The Chanina Ben Dosa, Rabbi Chanina Ben Dosa, ke'eved lefnei hamelech. He's like a servant before the melech. As based on the Gemara there, Rashi, the commentaries, what's the pshat? Because a sar, even though yes, he's superior in stature, but he doesn't have that access. You can't just go in and out. He can't just go whenever he wants to the king. The servant, because of his simplicity and he's serving the king, he's like nichnas v'yetze, he says. He's in and out. So he could ask the king anything he wants, simply because of his lower stature. Whereas the sar could only go at official times when he's invited, etc. Obviously, the explanation here is going to be even deeper than that. So the Rebbe Rashab says, "Hari b'chdei lahamshich harefua b'poel mamish lamata," which means in order to bring down healing, an actual healing down below, lamata, the hainu, which means l'shanes hanivroim mikamoy shehem. In order to do that, you have to change something because the child was sick. Naturally speaking, he may not have survived. So you have to change the creations from the way they are. That the ill person, the ill one, should become healed. In Tanya, in Kunter Sachen, he says that healing means you're drawing down a lukus and actually changing the reality on the ground. Or else you wouldn't need the prayer. If he would heal on his own, you don't need prayer. So the tefillah does what? To be mamshech refuah means you have to create a change in reality down below. Zehu ayidei madregas eved dafke. To be able to achieve such change down below is dafke through, is explicitly, specifically through a servant. That's essentially what the Gemara says. Now, as I said, the basic pshat is, like I said before, that a sar doesn't have access like an eved does. But there's also another explanation given there, I believe. A sar also, his relationship with the king is a very formal one. Not just access, his relationship is in a very specific way. It's based on intelligence, it's based on his qualities. So he doesn't have that innocence, so to speak. Like the king can say, listen, we have a relationship. It's not like the Eved, because of his simplicity, has a certain pshittas that he could ask the king anything. It's not based on giluyim, basically, as we're going to learn now. The Eved's relationship with the king is not based on giluyim. It's not based on intelligence or qualities. The minister wouldn't be a minister unless he had certain qualities. Let's say he's a great finance minister, or he's a great war strategist. Whatever he's a secretary of state, he has skills, he has knowledge, and so on. So his relationship with God is based on giluyim. The Eved's relationship with God is only based on simple serving him. And that reaches deeper and therefore has the power to draw down and create change down below. So let's read it inside and we'll explain it as well. Because how it's known, the Bittul Eved, that the Bittul of the Eved, the nullification, I don't want to say nullification, the suspension of self of the Eved. I want to say to you, I think I mentioned this in Sefer Maimorim Yiddish. I recently saw, this is the Maimorim of the Frierdiker Rebbe, he translates Bittul, interesting, Übergegebenkeit, devotion, dedication. And he says, Koyach HaBittul is the Kraft von Übergegebenkeit, the art of devotion. I found that to be quite interesting, quite powerful, because usually Bittul, we look for words like nullification, sublimation, modesty, humility. I like suspension of self, basically putting yourself aside and dedicating to something greater than yourself. I mean, we have all kinds of words, but there he calls it the art of devotion or dedication, of complete commitment, the art of commitment. So maybe that's a good word to use. Obviously context matters, but bottom line, the bittul here means, as we understand, I think it's important to spell out in English, that you put yourself aside, you are completely subjugated to the one that you're bottled to. And we know there are levels of bittul. So he says the bittul of an eved is be'etzem ahusei dafke. Its bittul is be'etzem, his very fundamental personality is completely put aside. He's not putting aside only like, you could say a student in front of a teacher, he puts aside his mind, at least temporarily, in order to hear his teacher. But you can't say be'etzem ahusei. And Eved, his whole role is completely, he has no identity of his own. Masher kone Eved kone Rabbi. Complete bittul. That's what a true Eved is. He's completely dedicated his life to be ani nevresi l'shamish eskeni, or ani le nevresi el l'shamish eskeni. He's nothing but a servant of God. Now I know in the human level of it, sometimes it can be somewhat a little strange because today we don't see slaves and servants in a positive light. But when we talk about a true Eved to a true Melech, that I'm talking about a not just a Melech like Pare, or like Amalek, or like a Nebuchadnezzar. We're talking about a true bittul, is because is really the bittul, like when you say David Avdi or Moshe Avdi, that he's going to mention briefly. We're talking about servants that are completely put aside their own, like a Merkava, essentially. All I am is to serve God's will, is to fulfill a channel to fulfill God's will. So that's Be'etzem Husay Dafke. The Zewa Hefresh, and this is the difference. Ben Bittul the Eved la Bittul the Sar. I know he says Bittul here without a vav, but you probably read it Bittul, not Bittul as in a verb, but in a noun state. That the Bittul of the subjugation of the servant compared to the Bittul of the Sar. The Bittul Asar, below they say you should add the word Sar, because the word, the Bittul of the Sar of the minister, who ba'keiches shaloi, it's in his faculties. Leiba etzem, not in his fundamental person. His faculties are dedicated to the king. The be'etzem husay halei doveru b'mitzias b'fnei atzmei. Be'etzem husay, his core personality it's a separate entity. Halei doveru, he's a mitzias, and a separate independent mitzias. He's actually a mitzias that has value. He's a person with stature, with skills, with intelligence. He has a position. But his koiches he dedicates, like he says now, he continues. The bittul that he has to the king, the subjugation is with his mind, and with his faculties, to judge and to evaluate and to judge. In other words, let's say he's sitting in judgment. He's sitting on the Supreme Court of the king. So he's using his mind and his faculties to sit in judgment, but he's doing it al pi ratzon hamelech. He's not doing his own, according to the king's will. Uliyayitz b'chol dover, and to advise in every matter. So he's not independent in the sense he's running his own show. He's dedicated himself to the king. But what was dedicated? Not his very etzem personality, his core personality, his faculties, intelligence. The other faculties that he uses is given it's like a worker that's hired. He's hired to serve the king. I mean, he's not saying here as a worker in that sense, like he's hired, but it means that he doesn't have to give his whole life to the king. As was explained earlier on page 1250, that's where he spoke about the Sar, how he serves the king in advising, in passing laws. It's just like the legislature of the king. Okay. Aval ha'eved, by contrast, however, the eved, the servant, ein shum davar b'fnei atzmei. He's no entity of his own altogether. Klal. Ein shum davar b'fnei atzmei klal. He's no entity of his own in any way at all. In his battle, be'etzem uhusei, he's completely nullified or subjugated in his core personality, with his dedication and his commitment, that he's given himself over to the master. And he has become, he's exactly like the personality of the Oden. He's not a separate entity that's committed himself. His commitment is so deep that he's become exactly like the master. And therefore, automatically, kol sichle v'kol keichesav, his entire mind and all his faculties, like his desire and his pleasure, hakol hu keichesav shala'adin. It's all like an extension of the faculties of his master, of the master. U'komishon is bar le'il, as was explained earlier, dibra maskul v'eschanon ha'alef, the first v'eschanon. Down below, they say that's volume 1, page 352. So that goes back a long way. Literally 1,000 pages ago, almost. Okay. So he's explained that. Let me stop if anybody has any questions. I think it's pretty clear, but in case more elaboration is needed. This is the inyan of Moshe Avdi. When we say the expression Moshe Avdi, Moshe, my servant. In other words, Moshe, even though he had many qualities, but he's identified as my servant. The David Avdi, another David also, David, my servant. Shua Bittul be'etzem ha'mahuz dafke. What the pasuk is identifying, what God is saying, that despite all their qualities, they also served as a servant. That their bittul was also in their core personality. So in a way, you could say it's like a sar that became an eved, because Moshe and David obviously are high-level people. But the focus here is their avdi, as they serve as a servant. That's the element here. Okay. Now he's going to go a little deeper, explaining Moshe Rabbeinu and his level of bittul, and in Avdi itself, there's going to be several levels. So I just wanted to pause here and just give one of the examples I always identify with well, that I think it helps understand this as well, is the famous Torah of the Baal Shem Tov, which is very, very reminiscent of what he's saying here about Rabbi Chanina Ben Dosa. The pasuk says, Tfilah la'ani, L'fnei Hashem yishpich sichi. Tfilah la'ani, the prayer for the pauper. So the Baal Shem Tov asks, why, when we're praying to God, why are we standing like a pauper? We should stand like a la'ashir, tfilah la'ashir. There's also an expression like that. Like pray like a prosperous person, like a wealthy person. You're standing before God, the king. And he gives an analogy. The analogy of two people invited to see the great king. So once in a lifetime opportunity. One of them is a very literate, a Talmid Chacham, a scholar, literate, educated, an aristocrat, well-versed in all the sciences and all the wisdoms. And the other is a Ish Pashut, an illiterate peasant, a simple person who doesn't have any of those Giluyim, doesn't have any of those qualities. Like a Sar and an Eved. First comes the Chacham, and he comes into the palace of the king, he has an appointment. As he walks in, he gets so enamored and so completely overwhelmed by all this, the opulence and the beauty of the palace, mesmerized, that he cannot stop looking at it. He sees the beautiful architecture, sees the collection of music, of books. He's never seen anything like that. Because he appreciates it all, he gets so immersed, he forgets his appointment. He misses his appointment with the king. Got distracted by the king's glory, by the king's majesty. Giluyim. Then comes the pauper, Ani, not the usher, the pauper, Ein Ani Ela B'das, someone who doesn't appreciate any of this. He never studied, he doesn't know how to read, doesn't appreciate any of this. So what does he do? He walks through all these chambers, not distracted. He walks straight into the king's inner sanctum, and he has his audience. So Baal Shem Tov says, when you're standing before Melech Malchei Amloch, Kadosh Baruch Hu, for Atzmos, suspend all your sophisticated tools and instruments. There's value to them, but not now. You're going to stand before the king himself. Atzmos U'Machus is also higher than all the Giluyim. Suspend everything. Stand like an Oni, like an Ovet, like an Eved Poshet. And then you'll receive the Etzem. And that, in turn, obviously, Hashem could bless you. Then you shall also appreciate all his Giluyim. Whereas the person who knows it all and has an appreciation of it all can get distracted by all these stops and forget the destination, forget, like Ano, Nesiv Malka. I want the king himself. I don't want his glory. I don't want his fireworks and all his great accomplishments. I don't want the art. I want the artist, or even higher than the artist. It's an excellent example to explain Etzem and Giluyim. Now, obviously, the point here is not advocating illiteracy. It's suspending it. Is that you're standing before the Etzem and you put your koiches aside. Now, obviously, the Eved is so bottle, like he said, his seichel and his keiches all become one. And once you become one, then obviously, when those faculties are permeated with that level of the man, in this case God, it will also ultimately shine forth in Giluyim as well, which is not the emphasis here, just saying that as an aside, because we're going to talk about that the etzem comes begili, as we mentioned earlier. I just wanted to add that example. I think it helps understand even more what we're learning here, but the idea is pretty straightforward, and that also explains the Gemara in Brachas, Rabbi Chanina Ben Dosa, the power of what Rabbi Yechon ben Zaki says, that's why he has the power to bring the tefillah, to cause the tefillah reaches all the way up to change existence, to heal a sick person that on their own it would not have been that way. The shanas hanivroim, to change reality, is dafka the Eved, because the Eved can go to that highest place. Okay. Any questions or comments or thoughts? So we'll begin learning the next few lines, but I want to just give a preface. In this bittul itself, we're going to learn, you could have many ways how this bittul is achieved. It can come from oir. If someone has a very deep gili of oir velikus, it could also cause them to be bottled. Or it could come from the keli, like Malchus, from the darkness itself. And we're going to learn about that as well. But right now, the key thing is to remember the bas, biti, bas is Eved, and bas is Malchus. And La'asad Lavi, that will elevate, because that itself, even though it's a makabel on its own, but it's rooted in the core essence, as we see in the story of Chanina Ben Dosa, and it's just explained the difference between the bittul of the sar, of the servant, and the bittul of the minister. I'm just thinking maybe I should stop here, because I don't want to start the subject without get stuck in middle. Yeah, maybe we'll just stop here. So I'm going to stop right by the words Bittul be'etzem huz dafka, and then he's going to explain Moshe Rabbeinu as the neshama de ma. Ma, of course, is Bittul, and we're going to see what that level of Bittul is, and then he's going to compare it to other levels of Bittul. But I'm going to stop here. That I think is a good place. The line on page 1300, the line that begins Bittul be'etzem huz dafka. Everyone's so quiet today. Is it so clear? Okay. So then